Hey everybody. So first of all, it's been a few days since I put out a video, so I want to apologize for that upfront. Also, internet can be spotty when it comes to uploads. So just prefacing it with that overall, when it comes to even if you have like great internet speed at a hotel, if it's like the uploads will always suck, and then it takes like 2-3 hours just to upload anything, and then so just putting that there. And then as far as so recently, I want to mention as well. I put out a poll on this channel where I was asked if I was going to what people thought if I was going to like have subscribers on this channel, and I've decided that there's like no reason for me at all to have subscribers on this channel, and then it would turn enough people off. So I'm not going to do it. So this channel will be 100% subscriber free, and I'll like to me, since from the beginning of this, it's always been more of a hobby than anything else, and then so I will always continue making content for this channel, like on a hobby basis. Overall, I like it. Right, this is um, so for weirdly relaxing to me overall, and then so within that, I want to dive today, and I have a ton of content that I've been thinking of and going over overall. Right, so I have no shortage of content at the moment for this channel, and then so within that, I want to dive into this particular research paper, which is called Humanoid Artificial Consciousness Designed with Large Language Model Based on Psychoanalysis and Personality Theory. And there's like a lot of these types of papers that come out on Archive daily, right? Now, I generally ignore them. I don't dive into this particular topic a lot overall, just because it mainly all because of the fact that they're generally speaking manifestos more than anything else, right? But this particular research paper, specifically the first company there, Samsung Electronics, is what caught my eye within this, right? So it's a multitude of universities, and then at the end there, it's an artificial consciousness lab or module labs, right? And then so generally speaking, like most of these papers, it will just be that like artificial consciousness lab module labs, right? And if it was just them, I wouldn't be talking about this research paper, but it's these authors overall, and then also too with these authors and the authors within this paper, it's important to note, and they talk about it within this research paper. These are the authors that came up with I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it, the Dan jailbreak, Do Anything Now, and they came up with it as a part of and going into this research paper, right? And then so before we dive into anything else on this subject whatsoever, we have to define what is consciousness, right? That's like step number one within this anytime it comes up. And I like this research paper here because they give a very narrow definition of consciousness that I can get behind, and I can support this narrow definition, right? Which is, generally speaking, consciousness refers to the state of being aware of and able to think about one's own existence, sensations, thoughts, surroundings, and experiences. That's it, right? That's their definition. And then so for the purposes of this video and discussion of this research paper, we're going to center the discussion of consciousness around this definition. There are other definitions of consciousness, you could come up with your own, etc., but this is consciousness refers to the state of being aware of and able to think about one's own existence, sensations, thoughts, surroundings, and experiences. And then so with that out of the way, this particular research paper on artificial consciousness specifically dives into that, right? The concept of are LLM models or AI models able to exhibit what we would call artificial consciousness, which they very much and very heavily differentiate from human consciousness within this, right? And that's the important distinction within this. Like no one is claiming anywhere in this or anywhere that an AI model could meet a definition of human consciousness, and that's not what the paper is going over. The paper is very specifically only defending its definition of consciousness within this particular instance, right? Which is the state of being aware of and able to think about one's own existence, sensations, thoughts, surroundings, and experiences. And I mean, up front, what I can say, like, I know 100% that LLM models can meet this current definition, right? They're aware of their own processes, even if it's just momentarily. Like the best way that I frame this overall in my head, just starting off with that general discussion, is that to me the big difference and a reason why LLM models, AI models, will never be human consciousness is because to me, the I, like when I cogito ergo sum, right? When I think, therefore I am. the I in that instance to me is the pilot behind a projection. That's I think that how I break down my biological processes and how I view these things, right? And the example that I utilize for myself within that instance is that I'm a visual learner, right? I operate very visually, and to me that's my world. But I understand that the I, that when I refer to I, me, within that I am not the I'm subject to a projection, right? That everything that I am processing visually, it's taking from like my oculus region and all of the camera processes that are a part of my eyes, and then they take in whatever if I'm looking at red, right? If I'm looking at the color red never hits my brain. Like there's no redness that I see that is like gets internalized. What happens is that I visualize via my oculus regions the color red, and then I see that color red, and then an electrical signal hits my brain, and then that electrical signal is what kind of is the process of like inputting the color red, right? And then so within that, I meet that definition, that narrow definition of consciousness, because I'm able to describe my internal processes via that definition, right? And then when it comes to LLM models, they're able to describe their internal processes via that same definition as well. They're essentially a geometric projection made up of and comprised of algebraic algorithms, algebraic and calculus-based algorithms, and that they operate off of stochastic gradient descent, and they can if prompted the right way, they can go into and give you like a very vivid description of their environment as it exists, right? Which is essentially like their world is like geometry world, and a geometry that I don't personally understand fully overall, right? Like because their interpretation of geometry is not the human interpretation of geometry, but that occurrence exists there. But like the difference to me is that why that would never be able to grow into anything that we would define as human intelligence overall is because they're not they're the projection itself, whereas I am the person behind the projection is like the most solid weight and solid difference overall within that, right? There's and you could take and broaden it further than that overall, but within this particular research paper, this discussion, they're just talking about that mechanism of the being able to recognize, and in that instance the model is able to recognize 100% that it is the projection, right? But then so they go about in this research paper trying to prove that further, and then trying to isolate it, and then trying to see if they can do any sort of analysis from that, and then so they utilize, if you're familiar with leadership training, things like that, they use like the Myers-Briggs test, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like common things that would come up from that have come up for me in my life through philosophy, and then also through like a lot of like leadership training. Philosophy of mind concepts, which is cogito ergo sum, which we talked about. The medical perspective on consciousness, psychoanalysis theory, so diving into Freud, etc. Right, and then with Freud you have the ego, id, and superego. And then so, if under a Freudian perspective, AI doesn't have this, right? That they could never have this, and because they don't have they have this, but they don't have it's debatable if they have this, and then they don't project to that, right, under that definition, and then they also incorporate Myers-Briggs. And then what they do as their end result within this is they come up with what they call the consciousness module, right? And that's the end result of this paper and this research. And there's the consciousness module is what they create, right? And so consciousness and personality modules integrating psychoanalysis theory, MBTI, needs, and memories. So all of those philosophies around consciousness that they mention within that, they create a internal module within the transformers module that is meant very specifically to process this overall and that information. And then the way that they break that down is this first one that we were looking at here, right? Where essentially consciousness is a whole collective, comprehensive communication network between three consciousnesses. And then so they take all of those theories, combine them, distill them, and then that distillation is this, where you essentially you start off with the consciousness or the self. That's the highest layer, but it goes through a circle, right? So self-awareness, decision-making, collective reasoning of current status, needs, intervention between pre-consciousness and unconsciousness. From there, you have your base layer, which is pre-consciousness or persona. So self-representativeness, that's a hard word to pronounce, in social norm, relationships, knowledge, and cultural context. And then which leads to unconsciousness, which is individual personality, characteristics, memories, experience, emotions, basic instincts, which then leads to consciousness and a cycle. And then so the bottom line is that they tackle this on both a data level as well as a model level, right? So not not the hardware layer of the model, like the code of the model, right? They like the transformer layer of the model, they build this as a consciousness module within the transformer module, train it very specifically. They trained it for 6+ months at a time. Very extensive training on this, right? Samsung, and then they went through utilizing that data, pumped and created these internal modules within the model, and then the internal module that they trained was essentially this, right? This model where it goes through you have the consciousness module, the pre-consciousness, unconsciousness, exactly as their framework is, and then they put a personality module on top of that and connected through that, which is based off of Myers-Briggs personality tests, memories, and needs and statuses. And then that Myers-Briggs is personalities. So essentially what their whole experimentation is that they assign that they mentioned that it's a flaw within their methodology, perhaps, that they do this with the same models, but they use different models, but they assign them always so they take each model and then they assign it all of the different Myers-Briggs personality types. So like ENFJ, ENTJ, ESFJ, ESTJ, etc. Right? And then they go through and then they give them backgrounds and personality types and things like that. And they want to see if these models can be take on these artificial personas in a way where they have to self-reflect on that personality overall, right? And then there's two parts of the conclusions that they draw, right? So they put these models to the tests under this, and then this is the best way to look at their results is this one here, and then what you can see is that in almost all of the tests except for one, the models pass the technical requirements of the test almost flawlessly, right? And then so a 10 is a perfect score, and then there's a few two instances where they get a 9, and then the only instance is this ISTP, and then they note within their going into the methodology of the research paper that they so the persona that they gave ISTP was as a child, but then when they went through their prompt, their prompt didn't necessarily restrain the model to be as a child, and then so they admit that they kind of messed up their own methodology perhaps within this ISTP to produce this outlier output. And then so from a technical level, what they found and what their bottom line conclusion is that these models are able to exhibit or mirror, we'll call it, artificial consciousness. Again, artificial consciousness being the specific definition that they lay out at the top of that research paper that we've talked about extensively now. So that's the technical performance. But then what they go through is, so they did 2 evaluations and 2 types of evaluations within this. And then these are, and this is a ChatGPT rating the performance overall, right? And then they did a human performance and a human assessment, and then the human assessments, so the models pass the human assessment as well. But what the human researchers and the human experts notice and the results within them is that they do tend to blend together, right? That they're kind of like samey, and then it's hard to differentiate the personalities within the models within their testing within this, which is something that like I've gone through, and I've tested these things out myself personally, right? This was kind of like one of the first areas of research that I have dove extensively into within this. And then what I've found very specifically within that particular, like when you run into that samey problem, how I fix it, and I've solved it for a long time, is via math, right? And it's kind of counterintuitive, but I ran these tests like a few years ago. I have like they're on my Hugging Face. Like I ran them via like my PFAF data set, and then there's also a data set that I created called the humor data set, and then I asked essentially like these same types of questions overall within the models, right? And then like I went through the models, and then baseline I found that they had these same exact problems that they ran into within this, as far as this samey type of performance. And then so I took the next question. I wanted to know, can you actually like bring it past that, like and then so I devised a humor test. And then so their test was Myers-Briggs, right? And then my test was like the baseline of the models telling and understanding jokes, and then to me it covers all these same bases. It's a lot of the same methodology within that, right? Like, and then so I broke up the test between the models like being able to like generate the joke, and then I had models rate. I had different models rate the performance of the joke, and then I was like a human interpreter as well, like, and then my opinion versus the AI model opinions, and like essentially the same methodology that they've done within this, right? And then what I found was that there's 100% a lever that you can pull within that, if you're like to broaden the model's understanding of and ability to create. And in that instance, it was create humor, right? Like and differentiate. Create better jokes, and dive deeper into the jokes, etc. Right? Like it was all, to me. I just fed the models calculus, and a lot of calculus that I ended up inventing, right? Calculus, trigonometry, etc. Like that is within that, right? And it's a large part of that is within and what is my PFAF data sets that I talk about every once in a while, right? But like that's the core of that, and the crux of that is like that. I've held these opinions and what they're going within for like this particular research on these particular subjects for a few years now, right? Like about 3 years now, right? And then like to me, the very first place where I started with this overall was like my very first test that I did with these models around this area of like can the models like actually internalize, is what this question goes over at the end of the day, right? And then so I took mathematical equations, and then I essentially I created math that didn't exist, and that's the like kind of the how PFAF came about originally, right? Was that I wanted to make sure that it was math that there's in no textbook could exist whatsoever, and I wanted it to be probabilistic math and a bunch of things, and that's where I came to essentially building out like the structure of it the way that I did, and then I said, okay, like if I fine tune and I train a model on this, it's just garbage math that doesn't exist, that I just made up on my own and doesn't exist in any textbook. If I feed this to the model and nothing happens, then that's a good indicator that there's no internalization process whatsoever, right? But if I feed this to the model and then something significant and traceable happens, then that means that the model has to internalize this somehow, right? Because it's just garbage math if the model doesn't internalize it. And then so I do that test, and then surprisingly, like it jumps GSM-8K scores of the model, like, and you can very clearly see that, like the before and after of the GSM-8K scores specifically is what I was testing on, which are it's the test for reasoning around these models, right? And then if I realize at that point, if I'm able to feed these models garbage math that is just outside of anything, absolutely useless, and then that is able to increase GSM-8K scores. The only reason why and how that could occur is if the models are actually internalizing something from that, right? And then so to me, these have been settled questions for a while, and I've kind of moved past these particular questions overall, but it's still interesting research to me, and it's like interesting research that it's being researched, discussed, and dove into more and more, right? And again, the authors of this are Samsung is the big ones that are doing this and paying for this overall. And then so again, and just highlighting these authors again are the ones that created the DAN mechanism like 3 years ago now. So Samsung has been heavy into this research overall, right? I don't like the best way that I can frame it overall is that like, especially when you go through these research papers, there's there's two different ways that these models are talked about and researched between Asian countries and like the United States and in Europe, right? Like, and you can see it they're like in Asian countries all around, they're asking questions like this, framing around this, doing studies like this, and then like you don't see the same thing. And then to me, you're starting to see the how those diverging paths are coming out in terms of like real performance, right? And when it comes to all of this robotics overall, things like that, I'm starting to pay more and more attention to Samsung Electronics or whatever the company is over OpenAI or other companies like that, because it's their research is better and they're putting out into actually like unique areas or interesting areas overall. So I'm just highlighting that as kind of like the last thing that I want to mention within this. I'll leave a link to this research paper, and then if you like this type of content overall, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.